when you were 10, your parents brought you to Kennedy campaign office, right?
My mother literally took me down to Bobby Kennedy's campaign headquarters in Washington, D.C. and dropped me off by myself. And, they put me to work, literally stuffing envelopes because back then you stuffed envelopes. I didn't come from anything. I didn't have anything. I knew that if I didn't get back up, that was entirely on me. Over the course of my career, Tommy, I haven't always been victorious. I have lost campaigns. I have lost a couple campaigns. I just started scratching and clawing my way up through, politics, and 30 years later, I became the mayor.
Moving to Tampa with a 15-year-old car and just $300 in your pocket. Don't know how you did it, but we're about to find out. We're happy to welcome former Mayor Bob Buckhorn here in the studio for Tommy's Toolbox Leadership Edition. How are you doing today, Bob?
Tommy, I'm doing great. That story brought back memories.
That's great. That's what I was hoping for. So tell us about this. I got a little story. I read some interview from you. It might have been 10 years ago or something that you did this. Thousands of interviews you've done. And 1966 Dart.
Dodge Dart.
A Dodge Dart.
Hunter Green.
Green. That's the color. That's right. And you came to town on a whim with $300 in your pocket. Tell us about how?
Yeah.
What? Why?
Yeah, it wasn't so much of a whim. I had been selected for Navy flight school.
Okay.
I wanted to serve my country first and foremost, and I wanted to fly jets off of aircraft carriers. I wanted to see if I could test myself against the best of the best. And getting selected was a pretty rigorous process as it was. Had to go through all the Class A flight physicals, all of that stuff. Went down to Pensacola Naval Air Station to start Aviation Officer Candidate School. And about a week into Aviation Officer Candidate School, the day before I was supposed to get my head shaved, I was diagnosed with a degeneration of one of my corneas by the medical facility down there and was discharged. And this is after passing all those Class A flight physicals, Tommy. And so I was 22 years old. My hopes and dreams were crushed. I had signed up for 7 years, which was the pilot commitment. I had $300 in discharge pay. I had an honorable discharge, and I had nowhere else to go. And so I literally drove from Pensacola Naval Air Station. That Dodge Dart had no air conditioning. I had one suit. I had one little bag of stuff, and I drove to Tampa, Florida, where I had a fraternity brother from Penn State who was living here, who had just gotten married. And I crashed on his couch, and his wife did not want to see me coming. She used to circle the one ads for me every day in the paper as I was waking up from the couch.
Subtly folded it on the coffee table,
exactly.
right?
Like putting it over my head. They moved 6 months later, and then I literally didn't know anybody. And that's how I arrived in Tampa. And it turned out to be a misdiagnosis.
Whoa.
Yeah. So after all of that, I just started scratching and clawing my way up through, politics. And the end result was, 30 years later, I became the mayor.
That's incredible. So I want to back up just a second.
Okay.
So you touched on something that many leaders don't talk enough about, in my opinion, and that's failure.
Failure. Yeah.
We all see, especially in this age, you do it, I do it, everybody does it, the positive nature on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, the successes, the triumphs. Rarely do any of us talk about failure. And you came right out of the gate with, holy crap, this was a failure for me, or you at least felt a failure, I'm sure. Tell us how you process that.
As it turns out, I am a product of my failures.
Not a victim, a product.
A product. I realized that I didn't have a choice. I did have a choice. The choice was you either stay on the mat or you get back up and get in a fight. I didn't come from anything. I didn't have anything. I knew that if I didn't get back up, that was entirely on me. And so I got back up and just realized that life sometimes kicks you in the teeth. And you just got to move on. You got to straighten out your nose and wipe the blood off your face and spit out those teeth you really didn't need and get back in the game. And so I got back in the game because I had no choice. And, over the course of my career, Tommy, I haven't always been victorious. I mean, I have lost campaigns. I have lost a couple campaigns. But I tell you what, at the end of the day, that made me a better candidate. It made me a better person. And it sure as heck made me a better mayor. Having lost and gone through that and realizing that defeat doesn't kill you. Losing an election, you're still going to get up on that Wednesday after the election, and life's going to go on. And so for me, it tested me. It made me stronger in those broken places. It showed me where my weaknesses were, and then I set about fixing that and making those weaknesses into strengths and assets. And I got back in the fight. Always, always back in the fight.
Getting back in the fight is excellent. And I'm sure during this time you saw other people with struggles, right? I mean, you said you come from nothing. I share the same thing. I grew up pretty poor. I made myself and I had to fight when people told me, no, you're not going to do it. And I keep going. But when you're at this point, you're in your early 20s, you're new to Tampa, you don't know anybody, you're seeing other people struggle as well. And that's pretty powerful. So what really just motivated you to day? Like just to, I mean, survival's one thing, but you didn't just survive, you thrived. What pushed you to get off the mat?
You know, I'm a former athlete.
Okay.
I was a Division I lacrosse player at Penn State. And so when you're an athlete, you're kind of built that way. I was always the smallest kid on every one of my teams growing up. I mean, I don't think I got to 150 pounds until I was in college. And so I had to be tougher, and I had to be stronger, and I had to be better. And even if I didn't have all the innate athletic skills that some of the other kids did, I was going to compensate by that, by outworking them, out-hustling them, out-preparing them, and being tougher than they were. And having a pain threshold that was a lot higher than theirs. And so for me, you know, those losses were not uncommon to me, but I just fell back on my preparation as an athlete, and I realized that, okay, if you're going to get back in, if you're going to be competitive, if you're going to make the varsity, you just got to out-hustle everybody. And you got to be the first guy in the locker room and the last one to leave, and you've got to realize that you're not the biggest and you're not the fastest. So what are you? I mean, what are you going to do to give yourself that edge that will make you more competitive? I walked onto the team at Penn State. I wasn't a recruited athlete.
And you have to work twice as hard when you're a walk-on, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah.
you're not no guaranteed spot.
No.
You put in all the effort, and they could just bounce you out in 2 seconds.
Sure. No scholarship, very little training table. You know, you had to fight for your place on the travel team. You were basically cannon fodder for, you know, the scholarship athletes. But to me, to have made that team, and even if I was cannon fodder, to have been a part of that and to help those guys get better and make my team better, sure, I was willing to do it in a heartbeat. I don't care if I never saw the playing field. I was going to do my part.
And that entire experience started to shape your life as
Absolutely.
early as college.
And you never lose that, Tommy. You never lose, as an athlete in particular, you never lose that desire to do whatever it takes to be competitive and to win.
That is so inspirational. And then that stuck with you for so many decades.
To this day.
That's incredible. And most people don't realize that their college experience is something like that, just what seems like a minute detail in your very accomplished career made such a difference.
Well, it was more than just college. It started out when I was a young guy, still the smallest kid on the team. You know, I was a good athlete, but I had to hustle. I mean, I had to really had to excel to earn my place. And that has stayed with me my entire life. I'm fiercely competitive. You know, you hear people say that they hate losing more than they like winning. That would be me. And so you're going to have to kill me, otherwise I'm getting back up.
So you would not win at buying me drinks.
No. I'm going to try and win in everything we do.
There's a little double entendre there for you.
Everything that we do. Even in my mid-60s, when I'm out there playing golf or competing or, you know, doing whatever, my kids are like, "Oh, Daddy, you got anger management issues," because I just hate to lose.
They're all like, "Uh-oh, Bob's coming. Everybody better tighten up."
Here he comes. Here comes the Irish guy.
So there was something in your biography that stood out to me. It was so fascinating. I love early American politics. I probably forgotten more than I've ever, than it's ever happened. But when you were 10, your parents brought you to Kennedy campaign office, right? And you stuffed envelopes as a 10-year-old, seeing Kennedy in the process of creating history. I don't even know what to ask about that, but it's so impressive. I wasn't born until the early 80s, but JFK was a unifying figure. How did that feel? Like, is that what got your first taste of politics?
It's a great question. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area.
Okay.
And where politics and public service is like malaria. I mean, once you get it, you can't get rid of it, because that's the currency of the marketplace. That's what everybody talks about. Everybody's involved. Everybody's knowledgeable. You wake up, and I delivered the Washington Post as a kid for years. And I'd be on my paper route, and the customers would be calling my mother, asking where their paper was. And my mother would come out looking for me, and I'd be sitting on the curb reading the Washington Post cover to cover at the age of 8, 9, 10. And so my father was a journalist in the Washington, D.C. area. So politics was always around that particular area, that particular time. For Irish Catholics, John Kennedy and the Kennedy family were iconic figures. I mean, they were, for the first time, you had a Catholic president, obviously of Irish descent, second, third generation like our family was. And so we took great pride in that. And so it was Bobby Kennedy's campaign that they dropped me off at the headquarters. I was in the 4th grade. I was running as Bobby Kennedy in that 4th grade class election. My mother literally, and you can't do this today, literally took me down to Bobby Kennedy's campaign headquarters in Washington, D.C. and dropped me off by myself. And, they put me to work, literally stuffing envelopes, because back then you stuffed envelopes. And I, to this day, have one of those campaign posters that they gave me when I left that office, hanging in my man cave at home. And so, it was a different time. It was a time when political leaders were more highly regarded, where it was something that you aspired to be and aspired to achieve, and that they were respected, and the country was, sure, you had your partisan differences, but we were Americans first and Democrats or Republicans second. You didn't have this vile, social media and the partisanship and the money. It was what was good for America was good for us. And so that's where I got my start, and, have never looked back.
So you mentioned a lot of things that were setbacks or hard to overaccomplish. And this just brings you to your early 20s, really, right? And so how did all those early failures and success impact your desire to be in government? We talked about the desire and interest in politics, right? But that's an interest. But now you've got a desire to say, hey, I want to get in. But those early experiences must have really shaped what kind of candidate or person you wanted to be.
They did. Absolutely, they did. And for me, in my formative years, Bobby Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy's sort of style and where he was positioned on the issues, which was very much a centrist. I mean, he was a Democrat, but, he wasn't a, somebody that believed in giveaways and, didn't believe in the law and order and a strong defense, and believed in balancing the budget. And but he also had a heart, even as a very, very wealthy family. He understood that there were people who were less fortunate than he was, and that we as a country had an obligation to help those who needed a hand up, and that there was a need for a safety net for the very people who couldn't take care of themselves. That doesn't mean people who were unwilling to work, but for those who were unable to take care of themselves, the government had to have a role. And the Democratic Party has kind of strayed from that over the last couple decades. Just as the Republican Party has moved in a different direction as well. But that very centrist, pro-compassionate business sense to this day is kind of who I am. And so those experiences and spending a lot of time reading and kind of shaped me into the person I am today.
Outstanding.
We could use a few more Bobby Kennedys in this world right now.
Yeah.
And I oftentimes wonder whether, had he won that race, had he not been assassinated on that June 8th date, Richard Nixon perhaps would not have been president. We perhaps would not have been in Vietnam for as long as we were. I think this country would have been a radically different place. But obviously,
it's left to the throes of history at that point.
Yeah, God had other plans for him.
I guess so. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and rewind a little bit. We're kind of going to just go all over the place, all right?
No worries.
You're good? You're keeping up. You're doing great.
No worries.
I mean, for your very first TV interview, you're doing excellent.
My first one.
Your very first one. You're excellent. I would never guessed. I would never have guessed. So all the skills you mentioned post-term out of your second term of mayor for the city of Tampa, how did all those skills before and during your political career, how did they transport or transfer into entrepreneurship and then later consulting? It's a big change.
Yeah, it is. But you know something, Tommy? When I left office, I took about a year off just to sort of decompress and get hobbies because I never had any hobbies because all I did was work.
You're an overachiever type A personality. I see.
Well, when you're the mayor 24 hours a day.
Yes.
So you don't get to choose. You're the mayor. So I took a year off, got some hobbies, loved it. My kids were starting to go to college, and so I got to spend a lot of time with them, travel with them, went to Ireland a bunch. And then came back to work at Shoemaker, Loop and Kendrick as part of Shoemaker Advisors, where we advise companies and consult with companies and engage with companies that are struggling with big public policy questions and how to navigate through government and how to, partner with government and got to work on projects that were very similar to the things I was doing as the mayor. So I'm not a lobbyist, but it was enjoyable for me to spend some time on the outside, spend some time on the other side, see how the impact that government has on private sector folks, and which I knew anyway, but I really got a taste of it. Worked through COVID and worked through some of the other things and saw the impact that it had on some of our major corporations and got to work on some big projects that I loved. And I got to pick and choose the kinds of projects I wanted to work on. Shoemaker gave me a lot of leeway. And so whether it was Brightline or some of the big development projects that you've seen around town, they used my expertise and former Mayor Rick Kreisman from St. Pete, who's also with me at Shoemaker Advisors, to help them sort of maneuver through the processes and the landmines of dealing with big public works projects. And hopefully we provided some value to them.
That is interesting that you actually, you're used to the government side, which has one perspective, which should be the perspective of all the citizens. Then you have a business side, whether it's large or big, they usually have one cohesive strategy or thought. And now you get to see both sides of the aisle. So that probably helps you a little bit better understand the struggles for both. Because, I work with the government all the time. Like as a contractor, I'm constantly dealing with building departments, zoning, and sometimes I feel like my concerns aren't heard because it's a government employee that gets paid either way. Not that they're rude or disrespectful or unprofessional, just I don't feel heard. And then as that private contractor, it's difficult. I would love if officials had a little bit more knowledge on the private side. And then private side needs to also understand in the retrospect that just because it's easier for you, you can't change everything in the government immediately because it's not just about you, it's about the 400,000 citizens in Tampa as well. And what's good for Tomco may not be good for, 399,000 other citizens.
It's you're absolutely right. And I will say, having been the CEO of a $2 billion company with 4,500 employees, 1,200 cops, 700 firefighters, all of the municipal employees, the vast majority of them get up every day and try to do the best they can with the tools that they have and the resources that they have within the regulations that they have. great city employees. I mean, I loved working with them and for them and beside them, and you know, they made me look good every day, and they do a heck of a job. And some really, if you can imagine, having been the mayor or a city employee during the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression, when every year I was having to cut everybody's budget except the police department and the fire department. So they were all doing a lot more work with a lot less money and a lot less people. It was a tough time for them, but yet they manned up every day and they got in and they did their job. But you're right, having the perspective and being reminded of, because I knew it intuitively, of the challenges that the private sector has dealing with government and navigating through government and the permitting processes and the regulations and the lack of awareness of the value of money and how the interest clock is ticking every day on some of these $100 million projects that make them less and less affordable by the time they get out of the permitting process. And so for me, and I actually did this in 2011 because I came into the same circumstance. I went in and blew up the permitting process and rebuilt it and started all over again because I had to. I couldn't cut my way out of the ditch we found ourselves in. Mayor Iorio had already eliminated 800 jobs at City of Hall. So 800 employees left our payroll. So we were lean and mean. So I couldn't cut anymore without cutting in the services. So I told our folks, I said, the only way we're getting out of this ditch is if we grow. And your job is to get people out of this permitting process so they can start building, start throwing up steel, start moving dirt, start hiring people, and start paying taxes. Because that's the only way we're going to climb out is to get more revenue. And so we blew up that permitting process, brought in a lot of technology, moved a lot of people around. And our permitting process became the poster child for how to do it as opposed to the poster child for how bad it was. We're going to have to do that again. Time is money. And the private sector needs and expects and deserves a process that's consistent, that is reliable, that tells you up front what the rules are, that abides by those rules, that doesn't give you conflicting, opinions and of regulations, and that gets you out quickly. Tommy, we have an affordability crisis in this city, particularly on housing. I mean, there's nothing I can do about groceries, and I can't do anything about the war in the Middle East and oil prices. What I can do is something about housing affordability. It's a supply and demand question. We have a great demand because we've been so successful at attracting new young people to this city, and we have a supply problem. If we can't get projects out the permitting process to increase the supply and therefore diminish the demand and lower the rental rates because they're stuck, or because it takes so long that unit that was affordable is not affordable anymore because of the interest clock ticking. We can do something about that. So we've got to. We have no choice.
That's incredible. One of our principles at Tomco is affordable housing. We're working on some projects. Some of them are delayed for up to 2 years.
That's crazy.
Everything's financed. It's ready to go. And then 2 years, the deal is completely untenable. Yeah. But we, because of my upbringing, I made a commitment. I want to honor that commitment, even though I'm not making as much, or maybe not making anything at all. And that shouldn't be the case. And it's going to take a public-private partnership. The government cannot do this by themselves. Neither can the private sector. No. And so it's very interesting that you recognize that from both sides of the aisles, because, like I said, it feels like you're heard. At least you understand that this developer's losing money. That means their family doesn't go to college, or food is scarce on the table, or no trips, and then that's a trickle down. Their workers don't get it, and then other people don't get it. So that's
Tommy, we're not in the home building business. When I say we, government, nor should we be. That's not one of our core
job,
functions.
Bob. Don't try to take my job.
I don't want us in the business. What I do want is a system that works, that allows you to be successful, you to supply the need and fill the demand that we need. And the end result is my citizens get better housing, better quality housing at a more affordable rate. That's success. But we can't do that if you can't get out of a permitting process to go build what you need to build.
Absolutely. I love that. You're preaching to the choir over here. We just had an incredible interview with former Mayor Bob Buckhorn, who might be the future mayor, but we weren't able to fit it all into one episode. So I want you to tune in for part 2 of this incredible series where we will hear more about what he plans for the future of City of Tampa.